We want to talk about cycling. There are some people who've come together and they're saying, let's promote a cycling culture in Nairobi. We were talking about this earlier, City. Saying, yes, there are many people who actually cycle within Nairobi, but there are challenges. You cycle in the middle of the road, in between the two lanes. If it's a two-lane highway, you are cycling in between, so you're trying to figure your way around. If you are lucky and you're cycling on Gong Road, then there's now a place that has been set aside. Now this is a cycling lane, and the other one is the ring
where
road.
You intermingle with pedestrians, but go on.
And motorbikes, and sometimes cattle crossing. All these things.
And mkokoteni.
It's part of life. At least there's a cycling.
At least.
If you're going to Karura, you can cycle. You can go with your bike, or you can go and the friends of Karura who help in managing Karura with the Kenya Forestry Service. There's a place where you can go and lease a bike for 2 hours.
Ngong also has a forest. So is there an equivalent of Karura?
I'm not sure,
cycle
actually.
thing?
Our guest will tell us. I've never heard of it. I only hear of this kind of culture.
In Karura.
Yes. But let's introduce our guests. One of our guests is Velma Kiome. She is a transport justice and commuter cycling advocate.
Right. So while she is with us, you need to talk gently about cycling and about bicycles.
Yes.
I will start. Bicycles are good things.
They're really good.
Yes. Very good. I agree. Absolutely.
And then Constant Cap. Constant is a senior product manager at Code for Africa. He's a cyclist. He is an urban planner. He's a researcher. He's also an advocate for safer cities. Am I right, Constant?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so let's start with Velma. What's this? Transport justice and commuter cycling advocate. What do you do?
Okay, for me, the journey was just getting over traffic. This was in 2011 when the whole city was virtually a construction site with the Thika Road construction. So everywhere was just chock-a-block. I lived in Nairobi West, which is, 15 minutes into town if you walk, 10 minutes if you drive. And then suddenly it was 1 hour. So I started walking. I was working in Westlands. I'd walk all the way to University Way along the highway. Then I'd take one of those star buses now for the rest of the journey because it's not safe between there and Westlands. And then I'd do the same back home. Then I started to observe cyclists. There were a lot of Black Mamba cyclists, especially as you get to industrial area, Lusaka, Bunyala, that area. They would go up the hill and go all the way to Kangare and onwards, and Kibera. And I was like, the only difficult part is the roundabout. So one evening, I just stood at the roundabout and observed how they navigate the roundabout because I was scared. I'm a driver. I've driven for, 25 years in Nairobi. But a bicycle is a different thing. You're the body of the bike. You're part of the machine. And you're exposed.
You're a nuisance.
And you're exposed. And you're considered a nuisance by motorists, yes. So I observed and I was like, this is easy. So one Saturday afternoon, I got a friend and we walked down to Enterprise Road. I knew a bike seller at the junction there. I bought a big steel bike, very heavy bike, but it was fine. I used it a couple of times over December when the traffic is low. There were a lot of drunk drivers in December. That's when I realized there's a lot of drunk driving in December, daytime. This is at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I just tested it when there's low traffic, when everybody's up country or on vacation. And I got confident. By January, I was cycling to work. And then I realized, wait, this shouldn't be the way. There are too few cyclists. In fact, there were no women at that time. Yeah. So I got thinking, maybe I should start a blog. I started She Cycles Nairobi, talking about cycling and sharing with other people online and telling them how my journey was. So I take pictures. And then I realized it's not safe. That's why there are not people, no women especially, taking it up. Men are more risk takers. And so they don't really worry about safety as much. But women kind of err on the side of safety. So I started talking about cycling, got a few people cycling. I saw by 2015, more people were cycling, and then there were a lot of cycling deaths. So I started to notice a lot of cycling deaths as well, especially along the stretch between Kingara Road, basically, all the way into Kawangware. So many cyclists would die there. A bus hit some. In a week, you could have at least one death. In a month, at least two. Yeah, so minimum two. So that got me thinking there's need to start talking about safety by design for our roads. then I got thinking, oh my God, the roads are not properly designed. That's why people are dying, because motorists have to figure out things, cyclists have to figure out everything. Everybody's figuring out based on whatever is available. But we haven't thought about design, safety by design.
For all
everybody,
users.
for everybody, including persons with disability.
Yeah.
So I started to now think, how can we start talking about the roads are not safe? Then Ngong Road, I saw an article that said a particular contractor had got the contract to do Ngong Road Phase 1. And I'd seen some designs and I hadn't seen any cycle paths. So I looked up the contractor. It was a Japanese contractor. It was a JICA funded project. I looked them up online. I sent them an email and asked them, please, could you include cycle paths? This was just after the Kileleshwa Ring Road had been done.
Yeah.
So I told them what I had seen on Kileleshwa Ring Road. I asked them to look at it, see how they can incorporate that. But you see, the design had been done. It was funded, designed, and built by the contractor and the funder. So what they did was they expanded the motorway a little and put that 1 meter sort of armadillo block thing. It's not safe. It's not clean because the drainage, it's part of the draining of the motorway. So you have a lot of debris in there. You can find glass and whatnot. So it's not particularly safe for cycling. But phase 2, which was, I think, also still a Japanese contractor, they did it properly. Even the bus stops, I had suggested that
Which one is phase 1 and which one is phase 2?
Phase 1 is from Prestige, just after Prestige or just before Prestige, all the way into community area, Kenyatta.
Yeah.
That cycle lane goes on there. And then phase 2 is from Prestige all the way to Junction. So you have nice wide cycle paths, very nicely done pedestrian path. Not enough trees. That's another thing that I really advocate for. NMT goes hand in hand in trees. We live on the equator. We need shade as we are cycling. So for people to take up cycling, or especially in January, March, when it's really hot, you need
encourage
shade.
them with shade.
So I wrote the contractor and they did it. They did phase 2 very well. And then there's what I call the Madagodanyo of phase 3, which has caused so many deaths in the last
phase 3
6 months.
is that part of the road that goes towards the hills?
To Lenana.
Where the contractor does not
From
even
Junction.
remember that they're supposed to be on site. Okay. Where Kura is now trying to go and break down some things that they had done.
I've seen them on site. They're trying to do something. But again, I hope the redesign follows phase 2, because phase 2 is ideal. The bus stop's actually flat. So a person with disability can easily use the bus stop to access a bus or whatever transport they're accessing. It's really nicely done. It's like so perfect.
When you say that you wrote to them,
To the contractor. I just looked them up. I saw a newspaper article.
so what did they do? What kind of response did you receive? Did
They didn't respond, but I saw the response on the road. So I imagine they've heard me because that wasn't part of the design. As you can see, the way it was done a bit ad hoc with the armadillo blocks inside and putting the cyclists actually in danger, not safe.
Yeah.
So that's where my journey began.
Constant, we've seen you in the media a number of times, talking about urban design. If you look at our roads, what is the process that gets to a road done? In terms of what's the thinking behind the planners, the engineers, and then the contracting and the supervision up to commissioning of a road?
That's a very interesting question, because it varies depending on who's in charge of that particular road. Remember, we have about 4 or 5 different agencies that take charge of our roads, especially in urban areas. For instance, we have the Kenya National Highways Authority, who we've seen putting something quite monstrous outside this building. We have Kenya Urban Roads Authority, who have just been mentioned. We have Kenya Rural Roads Authority, who still find their way into urban areas through members of parliament who I understand chair, the local MP chairs the Kenya Rural,
the Kura component, Kera.
Which has a Kera component. Okay. And then now we also have NMS, and then we have the local authority, which is the county government. That is more or less the same as NMS. So it varies. And some of them, in particular, some of the major projects are donor funded. Many of our major projects are donor funded. So when you look at Ngong Road that has been mentioned, Outer Ring Road that has been mentioned, Outer Ring Road, Thika Superhighway, which was via loan. So depending on the classification of the road, a different you have different authorities taking charge of them, and at the same time, you may have also different standards being put. Very recently, we developed the street design manual for urban areas in Kenya. I say we because we took part in the public participation, but it was essentially developed by the Ministry of Transport and together with ITDP and a bit of UN influence from UN Habitat, etc. Because for many years we didn't have standards for urban roads per se.
Excuse me. Start that again. We didn't have standards.
Yeah, we didn't have specific standards for urban roads.
How did this arise?
That's how things have been, apparently.
So how were we then building our roads?
We've been building our roads like highways, and with the same standard as also many other rural roads. If you look at any road built before the last decade or so, you realize that NMT was not a priority.
NMT is who exactly?
Non-motorized transit, was not a priority. It was not so clear where certain other services would come in. For instance, in urban areas, street furniture is part and parcel of a street design.
Let me just hold you there. You're telling us that with all these fellows in Kenya who are trained planners and have been city planners and town planners and whatever planners, you're telling me that in all this time we didn't have standards by which to actually build these roads in this country?
Specific standards for urban areas.
We didn't have.
We didn't have. We were using general standards. And I remember because someone actually raised it in 2014 at a thesis defense at the University of Nairobi. And he was questioned, just the way you're questioning me.
I thought we're just chatting.
and he questioned, I still remember, because,
serious public health issues.
But fortunately, with the street design manual for urban areas in Kenya, that, it's not yet been approved, but we're already seeing it being put in place. We're seeing it being put. Now, different roads will come with, unfortunately, because also we're dependent on development partners for many of our
Funding,
our projects and funding. Some of these partners may come with their own standards. So, we've talked of the Japanese who will come with, we've all used Ngong Road. We've seen some very sharp corners as you're turning into the road, which is very different from maybe...
Where you have acceleration lanes.
Yeah, actually it's missing. Those acceleration lanes are missing all the way.
In the entire Ngong Road, you don't have. You just come in and get out.
You're a planner.
Yes.
Now, forgive me, but it's of interest to me. When you say you are a planner or a town planner, what exactly is your function as a planner? What are you supposed to do?
That's an interesting question. We are supposed to plan.
His work locates people.
Yeah,
actually,
what we do.
He is right in answering me that way because it's a good preamble. You're supposed to plan now. Break it down for us.
Yeah, what we do, the best way of actually summarizing the job of a planner is to work with citizens to bring out the vision that they have for a place. Okay? So it's not, I don't sit down in an office and design something and say, this is best for you. I sit down with citizens, find out what are your social, economic, human challenges, strengths, and then from that, I'm able to come up with what works best for you. Now, our approach has not been that way over the years. And
what has our approach been?
Our approach has been a big brother kind of mindset.
Top
where,
down.
I sit down and I say, I know what you people need. And we see it, we see it everywhere. We see it in transport, we see it in housing. Somebody wakes up and says the problem in this country is affordable housing, and then sells houses for 5 million shillings?
Affordable.
And in the name of affordable, because you create this assumption that you know what people need. The last week I was with people from informal settlements, and talking to persons with disability, children, the elderly from informal settlements. And when you ask them, for instance, show me how your journey is on a daily basis, and someone shows you from his house, He goes to the market, he goes to church, he goes to school, whatever. What are the challenges you have? The challenges that they have are very different from what we assume. Okay? The challenges, for instance, that a child has in navigating. Children, in fact, are interesting because they like using shortcuts and everything. But they tell you, here, hapa kuna watu wanavuta bangi. Hapa hakuna street lights. Hapa it's nice because it's well lit. The elderly will have a problem in places where they have challenges in climbing, for instance. Okay, same thing with persons with disability. Places are too narrow. They are forced to move along the road, the main carriageway. I was talking to some from Madare. They were telling me they have to move along the main carriageway of Juja Road because there's no space for them, and part of the space has been occupied by vendors.
Kiosks.
Yeah, by kiosks and vendors. So when you get to talk to such groups, you get to understand, what needs should you put in place in the design process. So we don't end up with a Ngong Road Phase 3 scenario where someone sits down and creates the assumption that here we just want cars to pass as fast as possible, because that is the aim of the purpose of the road. There's a lot more life and activity that happens around that particular corridor.
And both sides of the road.
So what we're saying is that what you people do, as I understand as a layman, is you look at a place where people live, okay? And you look at all the complementing and competing needs that they have, and then you look at what else they require in terms of infrastructure, and then you look at maybe other social needs that they have, and you perhaps project it in the future and say, okay, this is how we are going to go about. Now, that's where the planning comes in. So this, we will do this now. God willing, in the future, we'll do this later.
Exactly.
Is that the reason why some parts we have something called a road reserve? You go to Westlands, it's 120 meters in some parts. In some parts, it's God knows what. In some parts, the road reserve is full of flats and houses. So is that why we set aside...
You have road reserve, riparian areas,
Yes.
Public space,
Yes.
such things are set aside preempting.
And that's
the
part of the
future,
planning.
And that is where planning comes in. Unfortunately, now over the last few years, we have almost ignored planning. Actually, we have ignored, because even after the approval of the Nairobi, the new plan, integrated urban development plan, we've not moved forward beyond there.
Who helped us with that plan?
That was done.
Urban planners and other people came together.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I asked that question.
Yeah.
Because I know, for instance, JICA helped Mombasa come up with this really beautiful master plan. I mean, wonderful. As a layman, of course.
Yes.
Now, that's why I asked, with this one of ours in Nairobi.
JICA have actually done, I think, more than 10 plans in African cities.
Yes.
Now, of course, and to call a spade, you don't just come and plan for people because out of charity. It is with they have their obvious intentions. And even when you look at the new plan, you realize, you get to see that there are certain projects that are pushed by them. There are certain projects being pushed, within that plan.
There are projects within the project.
Projects within the project that are of interest to the person funding, which is an unfortunate reality.
As should be.
No, it's like that because we ourselves haven't decided what we want. So, for instance, the concept of giving a donor fund, design, and build is wrong. That donor doesn't know what we need, doesn't know Ngong Road and how it's used on both sides of the road. I mean, one side is residential, one side is business. Part of it, as you go along, is both sides residential, schools, that kind of thing. So they won't take that into account. What is supposed to happen is the roads authorities are supposed to already have plans. So you have a plan for BRT, a plan for just a road. So then the funder says we have
X
50
amount of money
billion.
to support
Which
you.
one can it take? Let's ditch BRT because it doesn't fit into the budget. Let's take this because it's still safe. The other thing I feel very strongly about is this idea of each of them being an authority. So authority meaning they don't collaborate. There's no interaction between the two in deciding, has the plan worked? What do you guys think at NTSA? Now, NTSA then comes, the safety authority then comes in at the end, but their focus is the driver. But the problem is the design.
But all
The
of
design
them, all
impacts-
of them, Velma,
Yeah.
report to a single one. There's
Yes.
a ministry and
So-
there's a roads board.
Yes, that
So
person
let's talk
there.
about those ones when you come back
Yes.
out of this break. So let's
Yes.
take a break at 28 minutes after 8,
Yeah.
having a conversation about urban planning, especially in Nairobi, and promoting a cycling culture in Nairobi. Would you dare take the risk of cycling in Nairobi, home to work, home? Have you been doing it? We'd like to hear from you on SpiceFM KE on Twitter. We are live on KTN Home, on SpiceFM, and online with Velma, Kiome, and Constant Cap. We'll be back shortly. In the Situation Room is Eric Latif and CT Muga, our guests this morning. Velma Kiome, Transport Justice and Commuter Cycling Advocate. Constant Cap, a Senior Product Manager at Code for Africa. He's also a cyclist, an urban planner, and a researcher, promoting a cycling culture for Nairobi and then looking at the designs for Nairobi. What kind of design do we have? So you say now there is a non-motorized transport kind of design policy?
There's a lot in place that has happened over the last few years. Nairobi passed an NMT policy about, was it 4 or 5 years ago? The Nairobi County Assembly approved it. And this, one of the implications was that about 10 to 15% of the infrastructure bill should be dedicated to non-motorized transport.
What does that mean?
Basically, the money allocated for public works and road repairs and such, section of it should be allocated for pedestrian paths, cycling ways, and such kind of infrastructure. The city also developed a non-motorized transport plan, which it's not been public, but fortunately, some of us have been able to see it, and we've started seeing some form of implementation. Not to the best standard, but we've seen
What does the
something
plan
happen.
say?
No, the plan basically indicates that there are some corridors that will be prioritized for non-motorized transit. It has a lot of focus on the CBD, and we've seen, Muthui Avenue, Kenyatta Avenue,
Mama Ngina Street.
Yeah, Mama Ngina Street. Although Mama Ngina Street is was quite some time back. Mwindi Mingu Street. So we've seen a lot of that NMT, expanded NMT infrastructure there. During this year's placemaking week, we normally have what we call placemaking week in Nairobi, the last week of October, when we try to different groups and activists and together with the county, try to put a bit more focus on public space and NMT and basically, healthier and safer cities. So, during this year, we closed part of a road called Short Street. I don't know if you've ever heard of Short Street.
How short is it?
It's a very short
Very
street.
short.
Where is it?
It is located between Ambassador Hotel and
The
National Archives.
Yes.
So it's very short.
I know the place you're talking of. It's like a passageway.
Yeah.
It looks more like pedestrian.
Yeah.
It doesn't
A
look.
bus
It is
to
now. It's
archives.
partially. There's a lot of resistance to converting spaces into complete pedestrian thoroughfares.
Who's
For
providing
instance,
the resistance?
The city wants parking because it's a revenue
It
collecting.
isn't. The reason why I asked the question,
Yeah.
the city is an inanimate object.
The city fathers, mothers, the people in
You see,
County Hall.
when they're implementing this, it's not them. It is the city that's doing it.
No, fortunately, and I'll say this openly. Fortunately, over the last 4 years, we've seen a lot more cooperation from City Hall. Okay,
County
and
Hall.
And
I
this
think
cooperation, what form has it taken?
I think one of the most visible projects was the
Luthuli.
pedestrianization of Muthui Avenue.
Yeah.
And I recently did a research there with part of my team, and we realized that there's not only been an increase in business happening there because more people are walking. They just feel comfortable. You look at Accra, you look at Ronangala, you just find yourself walking there. Walking there. But also an improvement in people's health. And one of the respondents even told us that he uses his inhaler less often which, it may sound like something out of the blue, but I think that is visible impact. It is said that the traders there used to have fans in their offices because of the smoke coming from the buses and matatus that were raving outside their shops.
They never turn off,
Yeah, but now, suddenly that has stopped. Of course, there are other challenges that come because now, somebody was complaining that, when you have benches there, you have idlers just sitting there and
discourages people from
hanging around. But I think the impact is much bigger. And part of this plan that the city developed, and again, I said we rely a lot on development partners because the NMT plan was done by a local consultant, but with funding from the European Union. And part of it also talks about Accra Road, linkage to the Nairobi River and Ngara area, and then also now linkage from the CBD moving outwards.
You see, the fact of the matter is that people don't just walk in the CBD. People walk from home to the CBD and back. Now, does this policy say that every road shall have provision for pedestrians, for cyclists, for non-motorized transport? We also know that people use mkokoteni to come from Marikiti to various estates, or to come from the market in Parklands to various estates. Does the policy address that?
Now, before, it's interesting you say that because we have about, I think, 4 major employment zones in Nairobi. CBD, which you've mentioned. We have Upper Hill that we all know about and has tremendous number of people just walking down in the evening. Another major place we are forgetting is industrial area.
Yep.
And I think on Lunga Lunga Road you can count 10 to 16,000 people walking there on a random day.
In fact, most of the cyclists come in and out of industrial area to Kawangware, to Kibera,
Kayole,
Mukuru.
Mukuru, those areas. So, the plan does touch some of those areas. Okay, and it does touch access to industrial area. Upper Hill not so much. Westlands a bit, and then also looks at some of the other major highways. But again, now we go back to what we had talked about before. Even if the city has a plan and sits down and says, City Hall sits down and says, this is our plan. Now they have to remember go and on some of their corridors they have to go to Kenha. Who wake up and say we're doing an expressway.
Yep.
And then they have to go to Kura, who will sit down and say, no, we, at one point they even wanted to do a road through City Park. But it was the plans were changed. Then you have a local MP who will wake up and say that his people want to pass here. Okay, that doesn't happen as much in this area. So we also have those
competing interests.
Systemic competing interests.
If I look at the population of people who live in the outlying areas and for whom transportation feeds into what we call Mombasa Road.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you telling me that when this expressway was being planned, or in the master plan, if there's such a thing for the expressway, are you telling me that all these things, because we are told there was public participation, and from what you say, that is what planning is all about?
I'll let Constant answer that one.
When it comes to expressway, I've never seen any plan that indicates that we'll have an expressway.
No, there's none.
And
it was virtually an overnight dream somebody had.
No, there is a plan.
Yeah.
What there is designs, engineering designs are not plans.
A design is a design.
Yeah.
But a plan takes into account so many factors. What does that place look like? What will happen to the interaction between South B and Nairobi West, South C? It takes into account so many things.
Are you saying
that's not a plan, that's a design?
Something as monumental as this one
was not planned.
Thank you very much, Eric. That all these things were not taken into account. And that there is no blueprint somewhere that tells you that on this particular place we're going to have this, we're going to take care, when we block this road, we're going to do. Are you telling me those things aren't there?
That's what explains the chaos that it has caused during its construction at every stage, that they're doing something when they're dropping the pylons. Nobody even thought, if there was a plan, there would even be a traffic management plan.
Actually, that is where I am actually going with my question, because one of the things that we are known for, we as Kenyans, I'm including myself in the we, is that you'll have this beautiful plan. You'll even cost it. And then upon implementation, you determine what you will remove and what you will leave. So this one will cost too much money, put it aside. This one is not going to work, put it aside.
This, as far as this particular highway is concerned, I do know, for instance, there's a famous, not famous, the document called Nutrans, the Nairobi Metropolitan Transport Plan or something like that, okay, that actually indicates options for this corridor. And what they're doing now is indicated as very costly and not viable.
It is one of the options that was provided.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because options are very clear. One of them is public transport through BRT or LRT. The other one was, just leave it as it is. Okay. Then there was the idea of what they're doing now, and there were two other options that I can't really recall.
Where was it termed as not viable?
Well, first of all, there's a cost aspect, and secondly, there's when you look at the modal split of Nairobi, okay, and modal split is basically a breakdown of how people move as their primary means of mobility. Okay, we are talking of 45% of people who, as their primary means of mobility, walk.
And that increased with the pandemic.
And and that has increased with the pandemic. We have another, is it 25% who use public transport. Okay, that 45%, walk because they probably can't, not probably, but because it's the most economic circumstances force them. Then you have that other 25 to 30% who use public transport, matatus, buses. A small percentage use commuter rail, and then you have this very small, 15 or so percent who drive. Now, when you prioritize 15%. Over 60%. Where are your priorities? Are you really solving a problem that you think exists?
In that plan document that you're talking about, what option prioritized the majority?
Mass transit.
Yeah.
Which
mass
was?
transit.
Either light rail or BRT.
Or BRT. And actually, this is a...
So the same road that was
BRT.
there before, but they're bringing the BRT buses.
Because this is a gazetted BRT corridor.
Yeah.
Okay, line 1 covers this corridor. Then you have line 2, which is being done on Thika Road. Then line 3, which is to be originally from Showground to Dandora railway station, and then a few other lines in between.
There's something you mentioned about public participation. That process is already flawed. So even though there was public participation, I remember there was the Architectural Association of Kenya met with the transport people, and a few other interest groups also attended that meeting. But the one that was most prominent was the Architectural Association one. And what happens with the public participation process is it ends up being a rubber stamping exercise. It doesn't record or even take into account the people who are saying this is not going to work. What happens is they collect the emails and signatures and names, and then that becomes an endorsement. So that if we were to amend anything in the Constitution, it's that public participation aspect, so that then we say the results of the participation needs to be published. What did people say in that meeting? Let's look at the people who said it doesn't work and why, the people who said it works and yes, let's go ahead. And then let's go back to the drawing table and see how we take this into account. The other thing that Constant mentioned is that the EU funded the Muthui Avenue pedestrianization, or rather the mixed use of Muthui Avenue. The EU has really been involved in a big way in supporting plans around safety, road safety, and transport in Kenya. And we appreciate that as Kenyans, and especially as cyclists ourselves. And so this weekend, one of the things that's happening is the Festival on Wheels, to highlight that place that the EU has taken in thinking through those things. They've done it in their own countries. For instance, in Amsterdam, what happened is, for a long time, the car, even though bicycles were considered a reasonable and a respectable use for both men and women as transport modes, there was still a lot of pedestrian deaths, and many of them were children. So there was a whole campaign around stop killing the children, but by citizens themselves. What happened is the citizens got fed up, they protested, they made noise, and they sat down with the MP and said, look, children are dying. There was a particular period where 3,000 and something people died, about 3,500, and 400 were children. So, but to the adults, those are too many children dying on the road, being knocked down, that kind of thing. So then the parliament listened and funded that citizen initiative called Stop Killing Children. There's a phrase now in Dutch. But and then give them an office at County Hall or one of the buildings it was a shop or something, and it became a proper government-funded citizen initiative. It ended roads deaths. They saw them come up with plans to redesign roads and close the placemaking sort of initiatives at particular times of the month, closing off roads so that children can play safely. So everybody knew you can't pass there with a car, children are playing. So then it highlighted that importance of creating safe roads by design. So the EU is thinking around those things, and beyond road safety and people using roads, we're also thinking about emissions. He talked about air quality on Muthui Avenue and how it reduced. I would love to hear what, for instance, on Tomboya, there's a whole matatu, it's like a long matatu bus park, constantly fumes into the shops. In fact, I really worry about the people, especially there was one particular shop, a butter shop, I think it closed because of that. They had to keep their doors closed constantly. So I think people were thinking it's closed and they move on. So sales were low. Many people there must be suffering. So air quality is another major thing whenever we're talking about non-motorized transport. Trees. I talked about trees. We've seen the felling of trees. This new construction outside your building has taken a huge... There's a little forest, a linear forest, all the way to along Wayakivi.
Yeah, in the median of the road.
It's all gone. You can be sure that by January, February, Nairobi will be twice as hot as it was maybe at the beginning of last year, before the construction started. So it will be a heat island. Those things cause other problems. Like I said, road works and road design and safety by design and all these things are a public health issue. We have to start thinking about what that does to people's health.
So what are you doing this weekend then?
So this weekend on Sunday, we're having the Festival on Wheels. It will be in CBD. It's the first time that a race like that, of that scale, cyclists and skaters, is happening. So the idea is to highlight and elevate the conversation around emissions and air quality and promoting sustainable transport. So thinking around how can we elevate the use of a bicycle, the way they did in Amsterdam, the way they did in all those countries. Those countries were car cities.
Okay.
Yeah, car-centric
but you're
cities.
choosing the least busy day of the week.
The least busy days because we don't want to cause
And
maximum
then you're going to
disruption.
town.
Yes.
And cycling and what else? Roller skating.
Skating, yeah. So we'll start with the skaters race. They'll do their dash across right around the perimeter of the city, Moi Avenue, University Way, do a couple of laps and come back to KICC. But the idea is to just take over CBD for just those few hours when it's least, we're car-centric. We have to remember that we're car-centric. We don't want to cause a lot of disruption, but we still want to elevate the discussion around why it's important to promote sustainable transport.
And then what next now after Sunday?
After Sunday, we don't know. We're hoping to take, probably next year we'll take it to Kisumu. Next year, the following year, probably take it to Mombasa.
No, I mean within Nairobi.
Within Nairobi.
So once you've done this, you've highlighted, and people have come and there's a celebration of cyclists and all. Where does the conversation go?
We're hoping that the conversation now will take us back to people like Consent Cup, bringing people like Consent Cup to the table, and then working on more concrete plans to expand the concept of Muthui Avenue across the city and into the neighborhoods. The idea should be, the other day somebody said Kiambu Road was so congested. It's like people just come to park in the morning. Before we started the show, they come, you mentioned Kiambu Road was chock-a-block and a few other corridors. Why can the conversation about expanding Kiambu Road be about then adding cycle paths? People who live in Ndigwa, wherever, I'm sure they own bicycles, but they never use them to come into CBD. And even when you put a pedestrian, the cycle path along Ngong Road, how does it connect to the one on Thika Road? Around the Muthui? It kind of ends around Ngara, the one that... How does it connect to CBD so that then people can continue their journey?
Somebody has made a
Above
comment
that.
as we conclude the conversation and say goodbye to KTN, that the issue of cycling in Nairobi is actually divided across the extremes.
Yes.
On the one hand, it depicts poverty.
Yeah.
Someone cannot afford a vehicle, cannot afford
Yeah.
to take a matatu, so they have a bike.
Yeah.
And the other extreme, it depicts wealth. So someone can afford, they buy
or health enthusiasts.
a mountain bike. They're also wealthy. They can buy a mountain bike, walk into a
Yeah.
shop and
The road
spend
bikes
some
are-
20K.
can be-
and
No,
come out with-
150K. There
There
are
you
people
go.
riding 150K
So
bikes.
those
Bikes.
extremes. Now, how do you bring those two extremes together and show that this is actually a public issue and not just, let's do for us the bike areas around our areas, because Kiambu Road coming into town.
I once did a count of cyclists on Komarok Road, Dandora, and within 1 hour we counted 100.
There you go.
Okay, but when you look at Komarok Road and you compare the infrastructure on Komarok Road and the infrastructure on Ring Road, Kilimani, you even ask yourself, why do we have a cycling lane on Ring Road, Kilimani, yet there in Dandora, where we have 100 people per hour, we don't have that particular infrastructure. But there are also other enthusiasts coming up with innovative ideas. And I'll mention a place called Baiskeli Center that has come up in Ngara, where they provide bicycle parking, showers, and safe space. So
Yes.
someone can, in fact, when you talked of Kiambu Road, I just thought the guy from Kiambu Road can cycle down to Ngara, park his bike there, take a shower, walk to his office, walk to his office, and then
But
in the evening
between
he goes
Kiambu
home.
Road and
Yeah.
Ngara, it's not safe.
That's the
That's
thing.
the challenge.
yeah.
Now, back to your question about how to bridge the gap. For me, cycling is not about wealth or poverty. It's about transport. In fact, that in the Danish, I'm going to mention again, we will keep making the European reference. The Danes don't consider cycling exercise. For them, it's a way of life. So how do we bridge those little gaps? One, second-hand bikes, making them more affordable, cutting tax on them and stopping that idea that it's dumping or whatever it is. I think there's a kind of a view of what second-hand is. Two, citizens themselves organizing bike trains, bicycle buses, as we call them. So if you know several cyclists around Komarok, you know several cyclists around Vindigua, I know several cyclists around Kawangware or along Wayakiwe. You get together, join up maybe at a particular time, cycle together, safety in numbers. Start to do that slowly. Then then all these bicycle buses can then come together as an interest group and challenge the policy makers. Say, look, we have the bicycle train from here and there, and these are the challenges we've experienced. Here, watch a video of our journey, that kind of thing. The other day, we shot the bicycle train from Reagan to the bicycle center. So we were doing tributes because the third day of November is also World Remembrance Day for people who've died on roads. So we shot with them and looked at what their journey looks like, and they made their tributes. So for me, those are the little ways in which you can bridge the gap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's hope to have this conversation with you again in coming days after this event that you have on Sunday, and then also as you continue engaging the policymakers and decision makers